I'm John Ralston Saul. I'm the elected president of PEN International. And with me I have three astonishing figures to make comments on this topic. On my right, Dr. Agnes Callamard, who's the director of Article 19. And of course, Article 19 is one of the leading forces in the world for human rights work, freedom of expression, and humanitarian work. Budhy Rahman, who's flown in from Jakarta, who's a professor of Islamic thought there, and Professor Tariq Ramadan on my left, who's a professor of contemporary Islamic studies at Oxford and one of the world's most influential intellectuals. This is hosted by International PEN. You all know what it is, but let me just say that International PEN is an organization of writers, publishers, and translators. We've existed for 89 years. We're the original freedom of expression organization. We have tens of thousands of members around the world and tens of thousands of others who would like to be members but would go to jail if they were members. We exist in 102 countries where we have 144 centers, and this is the 50th anniversary of our Writers in Prison Committee, which works constantly on a list of approximately 900 writers, publishers, and translators who are either in prison or in danger of going to prison. And many of them, frankly, are in this situation, are in prison, in danger of going to prison, or are in exile because of conflicts involving religions. Our difficulty with the concept being pushed forward of religious defamation goes in many directions. One of them is, frankly, that the whole argument as it's put forward is filled with confusion. And I'll give you a simple example. There have been 3 resolutions put forward at different levels by the United Nations, and they're based on assumptions such as this. And I'm quoting from a General Assembly resolution. Recognizing the valuable contributions of all religions and beliefs to modern civilization. Well, of course, that's true, but it's also completely untrue, because the last 200 years is filled with examples of religious conflict which have done precisely the opposite. So you can't base a United Nations resolution limiting freedom of expression on the assumption that religions only do one thing when they also do the opposite. The reality also is that most criticism of religion, most provocation of religion comes not from individuals, but from other religions and from sects within religions. This shows part of the unresolvable confusion in the religious defamation movement. Should we, writers, be limited in our criticism of Florida pastors? Should we be limited in our criticism of mullahs encouraging violence? Should we be limited in our criticism of priests and ministers encouraging violence, for example, in Ireland? The recent Quran burning threat is a perfect example of the fact that laws do not work in cases like this, but the full use of freedom of expression meant that something that could have been very problematic didn't happen. On top of that, what concerns us is that religions are organizations of belonging and of power. They are capable, like any organization, of both good and of evil. And in order to ensure that the good dominates, we are dependent on freedom of religion, freedom of religious choice, and freedom to criticize religions. PEN International was here in this building in 2008 explaining all of this. We have said from the beginning, human rights are attached to individuals. Human rights are not attached to states or organized groups or ideas. When governments attempt to limit the rights of citizens to criticize, they are not seeking, as they claim, to protect faith or belief. They are seeking increased power over the citizenry. So now let me turn first to Budhy Rahman to make a few comments.
Thank you. I will speak from the Indonesian case. And the recent debate over religious freedom and freedom of expression in Indonesia actually has its root in, we can call the Defamation of Religious Act. So this is the act in Indonesia. and this act transformed into the Article 156A was recently inserted in between Article 156 and 157 of Criminal Code. This article was the actualization of the Defamation of Religions Acts, number 1, from 1965, and Article 4 on the inclusion of an article on religious defamation in Criminal Code. For this reason, the article was inserted into Chapter 5 of the Criminal Code on crimes against public order rather than a special chapter, for instance, on religions or religious belief. Article 156 already addresses the consequence of insulting or mistreating other groups in Indonesia, and Article 157 details the sanction of that apply for public display of hostility. So this is the context in Indonesia why I think we must criticize the defamation of religious from the United Nations. However, being article aimed at maintaining public order, they did not cover matters concerning minority groups that deviate from the majority religion or primary religion, as is the case in defamation of religious acts in Indonesia, and the new Article 156A. So now there is a debate of over Article 156A. Is that the article was formed before the 1945 Constitution was amended, so that the new Article 28 contained a detailed explanation of human rights, which included religious freedom and freedom of expression as a non-derogative right. The point of debate is whether Article 156A of the Criminal Code is an exception to Article 28.g, verse 2 of the 1945 Constitution, which otherwise potentially restricts the application of Article 156. The Department of Religious Affairs believes that it is an exception. That is, they believe that religious freedom and freedom of expression may be restricted by Article 28G, verse 2, and as a result, in order to protect religious freedom and freedom of expression, Article 156A must be enforced as it is, without change or adjustment to detailed passage on human rights in the 1945 Constitution. Of course, and the implication, radical Muslim groups in Indonesia support this view, and it is hardly surprising that Article 156A of the Criminal Code is often invoked as radical groups intimidate and attack group they consider deviant and misleading. So the term deviant and misleading come from Arabic, dalun mudillun, then this is the translation from the Arabic is equated with the word in Article 156A of the Criminal Code, abuse or defame religions. So it is not surprising either that radical Muslims use religious defamation and deviant and misleading interchangeably. So, and those who support the non-derogable right of religious freedom and freedom of expression, including human rights or freedom of religions activists, believe that Article 156A of the Criminal Code should be removed and revoked so that it's accord with the entire Article 28 of the amended Constitution. This group feel that Article 28G, verse 2 on restriction to human rights for several fundamental reasons cannot be applied to faith or interpretation of a belief, but can only apply to religious expression in accordance with criteria details in the same verse. All the cases of religious freedom and religious expression in Indonesia now, many cases of that, restrictions and legal persecutions against belief itself and not on its expression. So this is the debate of religious freedom and freedom of expression in Indonesia. Now, I can conclude the conclusion. As a matter of fact, defamation of religious act in Indonesia violates Indonesian obligation under international law. The defamation of religious acts violates Indonesia's international treaty obligation by protecting religious ideas instead of the persons who are there to religious ideas, like the president said before. This defamation of religious act also violates equal protection and freedom of association by excluding people with disfavored religious belief from civil society. This defamation of religious act also violates the fundamental freedoms of religion and freedom of expression by criminalizing peaceful expression of sincere religious belief. There is many cases in Indonesia about this. So learning from Indonesian cases of defamation of religions act, United Nations resolution on defamation of religions are incompatible with the fundamental freedom of individuals to freely exercise and peacefully express their thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. Unlike traditional defamation laws, which punish false statement of fact that harm individual persons, measures prohibiting the defamation of religions punish the peaceful criticism of ideas. Additionally, the concept of defamation of religions is fundamentally inconsistent with the universal principle outlines in the United Nations founding documents, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which affirms the protection of religious individuals rather than ideas or religions. Such resolutions provide international support for domestic laws against blasphemy and injury to religious feelings, which are often abused by governments to punish the peaceful expression of disfavored political or religious belief and ideas, such in Indonesian cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, Dr. Agnes Callamard.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very grateful to International PEN for having invited me to share this eminent panel and for sharing some of my thoughts on the questions of faith and freedom of expression. In my short presentation, I would like to make 2 points, which will be, I'm trying to open up the debate a little bit to different perspectives. The first point I would like to make is with regard to the importance of positive measures and obligations as opposed to restrictive ones. And the second will be around the importance of process and space. The international and in many ways national communities are in a critical position at the moment as far as the interplay between religion and expression, freedom of expression and state are concerned. On the one hand, there has been a marked decrease in support of the concept of freedom of defamation of religion at the March session of the Human Rights Council. On the other hand, there has been, as mentioned by the President earlier, the Florida pastor's threat to burn the Quran on 9/11 anniversary this year. There has been bans on the wearing of the veil in Europe, the ban on the construction of minarets in Switzerland, and continued attacks against religious minorities in Pakistan, Egypt, and so on. So there is, there is a pressure somehow for the concept to remain and entrench itself, if not in international law, at least in the debates in that setting. At the same time, I think the last years have demonstrated the intellectual, political, conceptual vacuity of the concept itself, and my colleagues from Indonesia has particularly well illustrated that in the case of Indonesia. But there is still a critical question for us all, which is how do we deal in this networked, complicated world of ours, of a multipolar world? How do we deal with manifestations of religious intolerance and discrimination? The concept of defamation of religion, of course, even though it is quite empty in many ways, is still on the table. There is a push, which is a welcome push, to move the question of handling hatred against individuals on the basis of their religion to a different setting, which is a discussion around incitement to hatred. And that's certainly a displacement which is not just a surface one. I think it's a very important one, and it needs to be welcomed in many ways by us all here to entrench the discussions and the debate on a more stronger conceptual basis, because there are manifestations of religious intolerance and discrimination. There are plenty of them throughout the world, and we need to find ways of handling them. Just defamation of religion is definitely not the way to go for it. In 2008, Article 19 brought together a panel of some 20 experts who, over the course of several months and meetings, reviewed the intersection between the right to be free from discrimination, the right to equality, and freedom of expression. The result of that exercise is a document which was here earlier, but it's all gone now, called the Camden Principles, which are founded on the understanding that freedom of expression and equality are foundational rights whose realization is essential for the protection and enjoyment of all human rights. These principles, the Camden Principle, provide an interpretation of Article 22 on hate speech, but argued throughout that protection against harmful speeches, including on a religious basis, is best done through a set of other measures, many of which positive in nature. Interestingly enough, the one aspect of the Camden Principle which tends to attract the greatest attention and the greatest debate whenever I have to either talk or defend the document is the last section, the section on hate speech. Little is made of the first 6 pages of the booklet, such as the right to be heard and the right to speak, arguably very demanding indeed for us all. As I have argued and denounced on many occasions, there is a disproportionate focus on restrictions, including hate speech, and too little on the positive measures that may be taken to ensure that freedom of expression and indeed freedom of religion and the right to be free from discrimination is realized for all. Such measures aim, among other things, at addressing and redressing the deep sense of silencing, powerlessness, and alienation felt by many groups and individuals, including many Muslim communities in Europe, a sense which is often used by political actors or community leaders to justify strong hate speech regulations. The disproportionate focus on hate speech regulations find its counterpart in the media and general public obsession with extremist position, all of which are eminently distorting and distracting. Indeed, as experts have argued on many occasions, including those that contributed to the Camden Principle, it is not necessarily the most extremist speeches that harm and hurt, but the relentless lethal infringement and the daily routine of racism or sexism, none of which can be regulated or restricted through the heavy and blunt instruments of censorship and state's intervention, unless one has in mind a totalitarian kind of state. But many of these painful attacks can be somewhat balanced and addressed through a number of positive and balancing measures, which are aimed at ensuring that everyone, including religious minorities, including minorities here in Europe, including Muslims, including Romas, for instance, all of whom should have access to the media, should have access to information, and should be able to as well influence the public debate. At the moment, this is not taking place. And I think this creates a strong imbalance in the way we understand freedom of expression and its interaction with freedom of religion. The last point I want to make very quickly is around the question of process and space. I'm less and less convinced that this particular space here, the Human Rights Council, is the best space to handling those questions, even though it is in its mandate. And I think that there are other ways probably to debate religion and freedom of expression, and then maybe bring back the findings to the Human Rights Council. I would like to highlight two such things. One is the current process undertaken by the by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It's a process around which will involve, and if they are in the room, can talk about it. It's aiming at organizing regional meetings around various interpretation of Article 20 of the ICCPR, which is the article on incitement to hatred. The way they are approaching it is by creating a space for dialogue, for debating different viewpoints, for trying to understand each other's perspective, and ultimately maybe come up with some kind of outcome which is of interest to the international community. I think it's an important process, and I hope we can all encourage and participate into it. I also hope that consultation will not remain isolated, but feed into discussions on proposals in other fora, such as the Ad Hoc Committee on Complementary Standards, which may also be threatening to human rights. The second best practice I would like to highlight in terms of discussing those very complex questions is something that have taken place in Kenya in June. Article 19 was part of it, that's why I can share it with you, but I'm sure there must be other places where similar discussions have taken place. It was just before the referendum around the new constitution in Kenya, which, as we know, was a very difficult moment. People were very scared to see a repetition of the violence that had taken place on the previous occasion, the previous election. The National Commission for, the Commission for National Cohesion and Integration, along with Article 19, organized a two-day meeting around incitement to hatred. And that meeting brought together civil society, government, politicians, all of which debated the questions of incitement to hatred, of religious defamations, on how to handle those questions in the most difficult environment possible. And these debates were actually fantastic. Not everybody agreed at the end. There were many discussions, many different views, but there was also a sense of building together a nation. And, I left the Kenya thinking this is the way to go. They've actually shown us that there are space and there are mechanisms whereby one can discuss those very difficult questions without, and finding a way forward. The fact that there has been very little violence may not be associated with that meeting, but certainly with the maturity of the political and community leadership in Kenya, and I think it is something that we should all take model on.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Tariq Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation. I really want to thank PEN International for this invitation, for many reasons, in fact. To be here today, it's important for me and also for our collaboration during the last years, and especially with their support in the states where I have been prevented from entering for 6 years, and in the name of academic freedom of speech. And I think that this is important, that I am here also supporting and sharing views and understanding. It's a very difficult question, and I think that something that you said from the very beginning, if we want to come to agreement among societies, religions, and intellectuals, it's quite important to deal with the confusion and to try to clarify what we are talking about, because very often my perception is that people are responding to legal procedures through emotional reactions, and I think that we should understand why it is so emotional, but we should not respond to a legal procedure in that way. So let me say something about that, which is for me quite important when it comes to defamation of religion, and this is what we are talking about today, and freedom of expression. There is something which is the starting point of our discussion, which is today, and it's not only an Islamic situation, I think it's a feeling within the religious communities throughout the world that religions are not taken seriously and are attacked. And this is something that we have to listen to as a feeling, which is the perception that even in the West we are a minority. You talk to some Christians, the perception is we are a minority and we are attacked. And Jesus is nothing, our religion is nothing, and our values are nothing. So Muslims have the same feeling, and Jews also from within the community, and the perception is this. So we are dealing with a feeling, and the answer is how do we respond to the feeling with positive measures, without coming with something which is we are going to solve the problem with laws. And I think that this is the part which is, I would say, an intellectual empathy which what is happening within the community, which is quite important. Let me add something. We are here talking about an international issue, and don't make it a Western discussion. In secular societies, and we agree on that, and we forget about the feelings in Indonesia, in Africa, and in Asia. I think it's quite important, if we want it to be effective, to take into account all the feelings around the world. Because I'm just coming back from Africa, talking to a Christian, looking at what is happening in the West, and thinking it's crazy. So it's not only Muslims from the South, it's religious people from the South thinking what is happening in the West is a discussion which has nothing to do with us. This is not our feeling. This is a discussion among people who are secular, they are happy to do this, they don't care about religious values, or this is the perception. So there is here something which is a conflict of perceptions, and if we want to come to an agreement, it's quite important to start with this. So don't make it a Western discussion, and we have to deal with fear, mistrust, and doubt. And I think that this is something which is important. Third thing that we have to add is that we are coming to this discussion because we are now in an ongoing process of controversies. So in the past it was about Jesus and movies, and then the cartoon crisis, and then the burning the Quran day, and then also, you know, even the Islamic Center. It's as if it's every time we have now, every 6 months, we have an issue which is a controversy. And some are reacting by saying the only way forward is just to stop it by law. So we have this, and we are talking about the Islamic Conference, the international, the organization of the Islamic Conference is coming with a proposal, ISESCO coming from a proposal, and coming with Muslims saying, look, if you look at what is happening in the UK, they have a blasphemy procedure, so why not for us as Muslims, because today we are targeted as such. So I would say here that it's for us quite important to have a preemptive policy towards controversies, and not coming just after this by saying, okay, this is a controversy, how are we going to react? Because at the end of the day, with what happened in Florida, what we got from the government is that we have no way to prevent him from doing it. So it was done from behind the scene to stop him doing this, because in the name of the First Amendment, this is what we were told, it's not possible to prevent him from doing that, except by going with you cannot burn because you don't have the license to do it, because this is against the law. I think that here we are quite weak in this, if we are not taking into account in which way, with or without law, this could be instrumentalized. And I think that this is why we need to come with alternative measures when we don't want to go for law. And this is my position. I don't want more law, but I think that we need much more commitment to something which is awareness, discussion, dialogue, and education in our societies, and to make it global, not only Western issue. So more laws is something which is the sickness of the time. We speak today about, against defamation, but let me tell you that this is also a reaction that we have in Western societies when it comes to that we are scared of these people who are coming, who are not like us, and we add law, restriction of freedom. You cannot understand everything which is said in Switzerland. about the minarets in this country or in France about the burqa is all the same. Laws are protecting us. And the Muslims are saying we need laws to protect our religion. So it's all about protection. Laws in the name of protection because we don't know how to deal with this. And I think that we need to come with something which is another strategy. So let me just add 2 points to this. This is for me something which is the starting point of our discussion. And we should agree on this. And this sometimes was misunderstood by some of the people listening to the PEN's international voice saying, oh, they are acknowledging the fact that there is something like absolute freedom, which is not true. There is no absolute freedom in our society. There are laws, and this is why the shift between religious defamation to incitement to hatred is something which is really important because it's something else. We are not talking about no law when it comes to racism, no law when it comes to hatred. I think that we need boundaries and we need limits and limitations, but not when it comes to criticizing religions or criticizing principles that we should be able to do so, but not by coming with something which is absolute freedom. Why? Because first is wrong, and second, the first reaction is that's not true in your society. You have limitations, but you have a double standard. You protect things and you don't want to protect other things. And this is the way minorities are going to react, and they are not wrong by doing this. This is right. So the first point is to be able to say what are the common agreement on some limitations when it comes to absolute. You cannot just promote hatred in our society or racist views, and that's it. There are limitations. And there is also something which is coming with the collective psychology. Is legal to laugh or to criticize the suffering of the Jews. But it's silly, and no one is going to do it. Why? Because within the law, there is something which is built with a collective psychology. Take this into account when you talk to Muslims today, because this is also what they may feel. So we don't want to put law on these feelings, but we need to take into account the feelings to get the better way out of it, the better understanding and the better discussion. So we need here to be quite clear on these kind of limitations that we are putting. Second thing that I wanted to say, let us be consistent and being able also in this dialogue to listen to voices saying, why is it that some criticisms are possible in our societies and some other cannot be done? And I think on this, for example, if I'm completely against anyone who is, for example, denying the extermination of the Jews and the Holocaust, this is not, for me, it's just not acceptable intellectually speaking. But in some societies, we have laws telling the people, if you do this, you are going to be criminalized. And then you go to other people and say, you cannot do this. We can do this on your religion, but you cannot do this on history. Are you protecting history by law? Consistency is not working here. And I think that we have to be critical on that, also in our discussion. So if we want to be heard by the people, I think that it's something which is quite important. I don't want more law, but I want consistency for sure, which is something which is discussing it and opening this discussion in our, the way we are promoting laws, the way it's implemented. Because there is another point in our consistency is the way it's implemented. It's not only the articles, the way they are written, it's the way they are implemented in our society. And it has to do with power. So when we talk about minorities, it's also interesting for us to come with a discussion. It's freedom for all, and we are promoting equal rights to criticize and to be criticized. So this is something which is important. And if we don't do this, you will have Muslims, as in the UK, in the country I live now in, very happy with the fact that Geert Wilders was prevented from entering the country. I say, yes, now it's for him. But I was against it. I think it's wrong. Let him in. Let him come and speak. But Muslims were reacting emotionally to a legal decision which was wrong. If you don't take into account feelings, this is what you are going to get. It's a competition of feelings playing with law and legislation. It's not going to work like that. If we want a rational, reasonable debate, we should be able to take this into account. And my conclusion here is, as it was said, and I want to add to this, is really to be able to open in our societies, in the West as well as in the South, in Africa as well as in Asia, everywhere, these critical discussions that are needed. If we don't want more law, but we want more understanding and critical debate, I should be able to go to Pakistan and to say to my fellow Muslims, you know what, in this controversy about the cartoon issue, don't ask for more law, take a critical distance, listen to what is said, and try to respond in a way which is intellectually open. But to do this, I think that we need this alternative strategies. We need to have, as it was said, positive measures. If PEN and us are only coming by saying we don't want law and we are not contributing in another strategy with alternative measures and promoting saying we don't want law, we should not, and Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics, all together to come with a better understanding that what is at stake within our pluralistic societies, we might just refuse the law and be perceived as people with double standards. It's not going to work, and it's going to remain a Western take on the issue, and I think this would be dangerous. Thank you.
So you've got three views, all of which mesh together in a very interesting way. And now I'm going to add four more views. We're going to have a short video, including the Nobel Prize winner Wole Soyinka, the philosopher Kwame Appiah, the writer Ariel Dorfman, and the Iranian writer Azhar Nafisi. And we'll let you watch that, and then we'll come back and we'll have a discussion.
I was raised as a Christian, and I was a very devout young man. But I cannot say that even at my most devout, it occurred to me that God needed protection from the laws of the United States or any other country of his reputation from people who wanted to say bad things about him. I think that it's reasonable to regard blasphemy as a sin, but it's not reasonable to think that any government is in a good position to protect God, to protect the Creator, by making blasphemy a crime against the laws of any country.
Yes, I worry about a situation where an international governmental organ like the UN takes it on itself to wade into these nebulous areas. Many countries already have laws about hate preaching, and I think that's already enough to guide the citizens about what is required for harmonious existence. Some of us find it very difficult to be completely objective about this, for the simple reason that we come from an area where we've had religious brutality of a singularly horrendous and mind-numbing dimension. And the question you ask yourself is, which is the worst crime? The desecration of the human body, of the human being, of the dignity of the being, or defamation, as sometimes described, defamation of creed. I wonder which is the greatest crime, the greater crime against humanity, which is what we should be concerning ourselves about.
Religion is often a very sensitive matter, and one understands why people care about people being courteous to one another about something that matters a great deal to everybody. But when you bring in the government and you try to enforce silence about things that upset people, you raise many problems. And the first problem you raise is simply that the law is a terribly bad way of enforcing good manners. It's a terribly bad way of creating respect.
What worries me, in fact, is that it will even give the state, the governments, more power to repress their own citizens. This is the first aftermath of such laws. For example, in the Islamic Republic, what will happen to religious minorities? Already they say that Baha'is have no right to exist in Iran. Then what will happen to the few rights they have to, at least in other parts of the world, voice their dissent? What will happen to women right now who are fighting against being stoned to death? What happens to Shiva Nazar Ahari right now, who is accused of warring with God? And those who defend her right that such things should not, state is not representative of God. These are matters that will hurt the citizens far more than the perpetrators.
I've seen my own book burnt. I have watched what it meant to be censored. And I've watched also what it means to say that in the name of security and in the name of the peace of everybody, in other words, always in the best interests of people, supposedly, that in their best interests, we should suppress these ideas that are transgressive. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that the transgressive ideas are protected as far as possible. Because as you know very well, or as we all know, the transgressive ideas of today are the consensus ideas of tomorrow, right? It's very transgressive to think that people should not be slaves, or the women should have a vote, the children should not work. Those were very transgressive ideas, in those times, in fact, they were almost heretical ideas. And yet those ideas are now the commonplace, the common, you could say, values of humanity. So one should think about the same thing. We should look really at the long trajectory of humanity when we are suggesting the possibility of suppressing anyone who criticizes religion.
I mean, we witnessed in Nigeria the most horrendous forms of killing. The separation of believers, when you have religious riots, we have the deliberate separation of believers from non-believers. And I'm talking about schools, the invasion of schools, children. They're made to recite, they cannot recite a particular portion of this religion or that, and they're taken to one side and slaughtered. It reminds you of horrors of pogroms which have been going on through time immemorial in the world. And when you criticize such conduct, you're told that you desecrated, you blasphemed against religion. Now, humanity, and that means the human community, just has to make up its mind, has to somehow find a way to demarcate the falsity of claims to the genuine respect for religions.
So many of our best minds have now migrated from different countries under pressure, including the country of my birth, Iran. And the fact is that these writers are not political. For them, this fight is existential. They are just being writers. And what the state is telling them is that to be a writer, you are anti the religion that you were born into. So what they are targeting, unlike this mythology that they are defending Islam, they are in fact targeting religion itself. And they're showing the citizens that this religion that has created so many amazing poets and philosophers cannot tolerate its own reality, so it does create a divide. It does show Islam, especially in this case, in a very bad light, as if all enlightenment comes from Western countries. And
if you think about it, every one of the founders, every one of the prophets basically had to stand up against laws of defamation. Laws where what that person would say was heretical, was wrong, because it went against the convention and the powers of the day. So in one sense, in the deepest sense, to include defamation of religions as a way of defending religions is nonsensical. In fact, it's contrarian and contrary to the real origins and meaning of religion. Because religions were born as forms of freedom of expression. They were born as ways of speaking out, very often against the injustices of the day, the intolerance of the day, of widening the horizon of the ideas and the emotions and the transcendence that allow us to be more human. And for those of us who believe in God, to contact that deity or those deities. But to repress those who would speak out, either inside religions or outside religions, I think is a blasphemy against those who prophesied a better humanity for us all.
I think when you ask about the current climate of hostility to Islam in the United States, which I have to admit and which I have to say I'm profoundly ashamed of and disturbed by, this is of course the context in which people who are thinking progressively might feel that you want some kind of laws against the defamation of religion. But what would actually happen if we had such laws? Suppose they were used against the people who have actually been fomenting this Islamophobia from the top, senior politicians in the Republican Party, popular conservative hosts on television and on the radio. We know exactly what would happen if they were prosecuted in these ways. They would be turned into martyrs of free expression. We would distract ourselves from the horrible things they're saying and from the need to distance ourselves from them, for the rest of us in the community to speak up and say, we believe that Muslims, like other Americans, have religious rights. We believe that Muslims, like other Americans, should be free and equal citizens of this country. We would be distracted from making that point into fighting a question about who should be shut up. We are not going to create respect for Islam in the United States by locking up people who speak disrespectfully about Islam. We are going to create it by working as we work, as PEN has worked through its statements against these Islamophobic hysteria in our own country, as similar as PEN organizations around the world have worked. We are going to work by working to remind us of our fundamental values of respect, our fundamental values of the equal dignity of all human beings, whatever their religion, whatever their gender, whatever their nationality. And that work, far from being advanced by having a state prosecutor on your side, I believe would be severely retarded.
I'm not a religionist, but I do respect, I do appreciate the spiritual dimension of humanity that leads to the formation of religion. But since you have so many religions in the world, and there's only one humanity, both in terms of physiological claims as well as by United Nations Charter, the one humanity and the fundamental claims of humanity have to take precedence over the conflicting claims of religion. I think that is my own personal credo.
So before we go to questions or from the floor, we're going to give the panel a chance to comment on what each other have said and on what they've heard, and then we'll go to the floor. And I'm sure you have a number of things, but just one thing that strikes me in all of this is that a large part of the weight for finding the solutions that are not law, and I think that was what all of you were saying, surely falls to the interfaith movement. And it strikes me that the interfaith movement doesn't seem to be carrying its weight. And I don't understand why it's not carrying its weight, why the failure of the interfaith movement to carry its weight should fall back on, well, then let's use laws. Or it's the writer's fault. And I wonder if anybody has any comments on how we can push the interfaith movement to actually do what they're supposed to do, which is to get the faiths to stop provoking each other towards violence or hatred. Anybody?
Well, two things. First, I think it's a responsibility of every human being, not just of religious being or of organized religion. I think it's, it's all of us, including those that do not believe in religion. Second, even though I think we kind of agreed that the current arm of the law is far too blunt to deal with the complexities of what we are experiencing, it doesn't mean that there is no role for the state. It's just a different, and law is still important anyway, but there is, in our debate, we need to be able to bring in a different perspective on the role of the state, which will be about encouraging, minority community radios, ensuring that they can have access to mainstream public debates, ensuring that the public debate is really public, that there are many more views that are being heard. Public service broadcasting, I think, is a key instrument in ensuring that there is something well-encompassing and integrating different perspectives, and yet in many parts of the Western world, at least, public service broadcasting is being under attack. So even though the law is not just, the law is not the only approach, it doesn't mean that there is no space for the state. There is a very important role for the state to play still, in addition to our own individual role.
I think that you are touching an essential point when it comes to we are expecting from the religions and the interfaith dynamics to come with something which is a better understanding or promoting something which is alternative measures and positive measures. But if you look at what is happening, and especially in Western countries today, there is something which is a vicious circle and a contradiction in terms, in fact, intrinsic reality, which is the interfaith dialogue is mainly about what? Sharing our values and perceiving the surrounding society as a threat for our values, so we are responding, and these are closed circles. What you are talking about is exactly to do the opposite, to open these closed circles to the society. So it means three things. The first one is exactly this, is that interfaith dialogue should not only be with religions. It should be with, agnostics, atheists being involved, because this is all the people are producing values. So when we speak about ethics, we should bring them in order to open the doors of this, not to be, this ivory tower of, specialists always gathering throughout the world, always the same, talking about the same thing. They don't need each other because they are all fine, but they are not doing the job. They are not doing the job which is educating the surrounding society about this. And then to come to be involved. The second thing which is important here from this is this presence of our religions in our society should not only be something which is a defensive presence. We should acknowledge in the West that religions, if we want to be serious about this, and if we are promoting freedom of expression, is also to let within the civil society religious voices coming with ethics and contribution to the discussion, which is today very difficult. This is why when the people are saying, you are speaking about freedom of expression, but they are always the same who are talking. This is freedom of expression for some people, but when you come with a religious perception, it's as if you are backward, you are not really, we are still asking, is it possible to be a committed Muslim and to be a Westerner? What does it mean? It means that if you are committed with a religious, dimension, it means your religious is preventing you from being a complete European or complete American or Canadian. This is just silly. But this is the current state of affairs, and we have to take this into account by coming to bringing this discussion in the middle, in the civil society, and to be able to say, what could be your contribution? And with this positive take on the religious presence in our society, doesn't mean that it's not to be criticized, because there are many things to be criticized. It's also helping us to come to the third dimension, which here would be dialogue and education and part of the dynamics of solidarity within the society, which could help not to be perceived only on the defensive, or to perceive oneself on the defensive and to come with, the only way to protect ourselves, you are so dismissal, you are so much rejecting religion that laws are the only way to protect ourselves. I think it's a comprehensive dynamic that we have to set forth.
I think it is true that we need more interfaith dialogue. But the problem of interfaith dialogue is now is too intellectual. Dialogue. So I think we need more explanation of what the meaning of interfaith dialogue. And I think from our experience between religions and the global ideas such as democracy, human rights, and so on, we need that the collaboration between religions and culture now more developed. So it means we need more concrete in dialogue, not only in spiritual, in theology, but more in practical problem like poverty in Asia, so many poverty problem, and we usually not connect the interfaith dialogue with this problem, poverty, environment, and so on. So I think now we need more interfaith dialogue in sense of the practical dimensions. So as Professor Tariq mentioned, that the values of religion the values of religions can give the implication for the thinking of this problem. So, for example, what is the common platform between Islam and Christianity? We can say love, for example. So, can we transform the spiritual meaning of love from Islamic theology or Christian theology into the concrete problem? For example, poverty, environment problem, and so on. I think it's my comment about the interfaith dialogue.
One other thing that there are people who would think that the idea of a sort of provoking debate, there are people who would argue, well, that's a Western approach towards individualism, which I don't think it is. I mean, and that's actually what Ariel Dorfman's comment about how all religions were created in fact as expressions of freedom of expression and of provocation. So that idea of provocation exists in every civilization in the world when they're being healthy. It's just a question of what do you do about the line between provocation, which is meant to improve things somehow, or however uncomfortable that may be, versus provocation, which is really aimed at destruction and at hatred and violence. And I'd just be interested to, it's a difficult thing to talk about, but if you don't accept the possibility of provocation, I don't know, as Ariel Dorfman said, I don't think you could get any of the religions who are looking for protection today. Yeah, anybody?
I really think it's a critical debate. Very difficult.
Yeah,
very difficult. And deep, but it's critical and important. You know, when we were facing this cartoon crisis, I went to Pakistan. I met with Hindu and people from India, and then I went to Africa, and the great majority of the people are saying we are not used to that. This kind of provocation is very Western. It's not religious, in fact. It's cultural. So the perception is that even in Africa, it was a provocation. It's coming from a wrong perception and a wrong understanding of what the Enlightenment was, provoking in order to move. But when you come to the tradition and the African tradition from within, of course, there is always this kind of tension. Then you have to reassess what is happening from within your tradition. You cannot neglect the fact that for the southern countries, it's not a provocation that it's perceived, it's arrogance. So when you are provoking me in a way which on an equal footing, that's fine. But if I have the feeling that your provocation is because you are in a state of power, that you can do it, to me, I'm not going to take it the same way. So this is where you have to work not on the one who is perceived as arrogant, but on the one who is playing the victim role by saying, don't play the victim mentality, you have to nurture something which is a sense of response. Your intellectual distance is putting you at the same level. So this is where you have to work on it, to integrate the concept of provocation within your tradition, but to work on the status of victims, because it's the easiest way. Remember, George W. Bush, just after September 11, we all condemned this, was just saying we are the victims. So for Africans, listening to the United States of America perceiving as victims was quite strange. We all agree in which way we, the states, were victims. But perceived from other horizons is not at all the same perception, and we have to work on that. This is really basic psychological empathy with the people and to understand. So this is why I'm saying to the Muslims, we should not work on the Western mentality. We should work on our confidence and not to play the victim mentality. This is the starting point of self-education.
That's great. Anybody else?
Just probably to add that there are many people in prison right now in Africa or in the Middle East because they provoked. I don't think at all that the idea of provocation is a Western concept. You know, if you look at the literature from Africa, it's plenty of great provocators throughout. But of course, provocation within a power structures takes completely different meaning depending on who provokes and who is being provoked. And I think that's really what is at the heart right now. Yeah.
In Indonesia now, there is a perception about the West. So because of Indonesia now become a democratic society, so many ideas from the West come to the grassroots. For example, the gender ideas, democracy ideas, human rights, and so on. But the problem is how to relate these ideas with the local wisdom or with the local tradition in Indonesia or in Islam in Indonesia. So this is the debate. Is this possible to receive these global ideas, but we still Muslim, Indonesian Muslim? This idea, same with the Professor Tariq Ramadan said about becoming European Muslim and receive the Western ideas. So this is also in Indonesia. So there is a discussion, a debate about how Western can we go. So because if we follow the Quran, can Quran legitimate the human rights? So it is the issue. So can we accept the human rights, fully accept the human rights, or just half the human rights and the others with the Quran? So this is the debate. But I think now many Indonesian scholars say that we can accept fully human rights ideas without reject the faith, the Islamic faith. Thank you.
Just let me mention that we also have here the International Secretary of PEN, Eugene Shulgin, who's sitting over there. And we also have the chair of the Writers in Prison Committee, Marion Botsford Fraser, who's sitting there. And people from many of the PEN centers, including, I think, at least 2 of the Swiss PEN centers, Swiss Roman and the German. Or have I, 3? All three are here, plus many other PEN centers have got somebody here, the Norwegians, obviously, the Americans, the Canadians. So does anybody else want, before we go to the floor, does anybody want to say anything else that comes out of the, no? Is there anybody on the floor who'd like to, well, why don't we start over here?
Okay, I'm an Egyptian journalist. My name is Abdel Nabi, and my question is to Mr. Tariq Ramadan. And I'm moving from the broader lines of the discussion to the specificities. I would like to take his opinion about the series on Egyptian television, Al Jama'ah, and is it a reflection of freedom of expression on Egyptian television, or was it an attempt by the television to distort the character of Mr. Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood? My second point, which is very quick, on the Islamic Center in New York. What is your opinion on it? And would you prefer that such a center would be a multifaceted religious center, including Christianity, Judaism, so that the Muslims can offer something different in America? Thank you.
Well, I can't speak for a minute because I need to say more than what needs to be said, and that'll take more than a minute. Are you ready to give me more than a minute, or you want to
Can you do it in could you do it in 2 minutes?
No. Do you want to limit my freedom of expression?
No, I don't, sir. But you, sir, as the ambassador to Pakistan, have many, many opportunities in this building to speak.
No, sir.
This is the only opportunity.
I don't
that
have
these
the
people
opportunity
have.
to speak to this August gathering, and I think this August gathering needs to hear from me, because I not only speak for Pakistan, I speak for the Islamic countries here.
Well, that would be another question to establish, which has not been established. However, we're most delighted to have you here, Your Excellency, and I'll give you 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
I am the coordinator of the Islamic group of countries, the OIC countries. Thank you very much. I think what you have started here is an unnecessary debate, because we in the Muslim world do not look at this as a debate between freedom of expression and freedom of religion. We are not opposed to freedom of expression. What we are opposed to is the abuse of this freedom to insult an entire religious faith and belief system, as well as the followers of this faith. Let me say that what we are seeking is equal treatment for Muslims, especially in the West. And we believe that we are being denied this equal treatment because of double standards, which Mr. Ramadan has also spoken about. And we believe that this attitude on the part of the West is an example of sanctimonious arrogance. Laws on the West do protect religious beliefs, and there are countries that have blasphemy laws in the West itself. And I can give you the names of the countries that do have them: Austria, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, Switzerland. And I can tell you each and every article in their constitution which gives them this right of the laws on blasphemy. The problem, sir, is also very apparent in the way that the West treats Muslims and views and beliefs of Muslims, and the way it treats, for instance, anti-Semitism. There are laws in Western countries that will put a person behind jail for uttering anti-Semitic statements or denying the Holocaust. That is a treatment that is not extended to Muslims in this part of the world. The facts speak for themselves. We have before us the cartoon issue. We have before us the ban on minarets in Switzerland. The posters in this ban campaign showed minarets designed as missiles. Obvious linkage to showing that Muslims are, in a way, people who resort to violence and are dangerous persons. There is this film by Geert Wilders called Fitna, which equates our holy book, the Quran, with Hitler's Mein Kampf. Not a single verse from the Quran has been quoted to demonstrate that Muslims or our belief promotes violence by Mr. Wilders. The ban on the burqa, the ban on the mosque in Manhattan, and this burn a Quran day, they are all manifestations of the same trend that is going on, that is taking place in the West. Mr. Obama has taken a position against the burning of the Quran. And what has he been labeled as? A Muslim. And he himself is denying that he is a Muslim, as if being a Muslim is a crime. What if he is a Muslim? That is somehow, we feel, extremely offensive. We feel that is extremely offensive. There is racial profiling against Muslims. Even if you are the most respectable person, you are separated and you're put into a different queue when you're at an airport. Every one of your bags is open. You're stripped down to your clothes. You are stripped of your body. These are the realities of the treatment that is being extended to Muslims in the West today. So it is not about defamation of Islam, sir. It is about the victimization of Muslims which has to be addressed. And that is what we are seeking here. We are being linked to terrorism, whereas terrorism has no religion. There are examples of terrorists in every religious denomination. The IRA were not Muslims, they were Catholics. So, and there are several other examples of terrorism that is taking place. Instead of promoting your NGO and other Western NGOs, instead of promoting a dialogue between Islam and other religious denominations, is actually serving the cause of those who want to use religion and want to use this disinformation against Islam to promote greater victimization of Muslims. There is a failure and actually a refusal to try and even understand of what we are trying to say.
Thank you very much. I'm a Canadian of Pakistani heritage, and I'd like to totally rebut what the Honorable Ambassador here has said. I have lived in the West for over 25 years. I don't know where he's been living, but I think Muslims have more freedom in the West than they have ever had in many Muslim lands. When you talk about interfaith dialogue, there is absolutely no intra-faith dialogue going on between the Muslim communities. And dialogue is a two-way street. Mr. Ambassador, sir, I'm responding to what you said, so it's rather rude of you to get up and leave. However, I will say this for the rest of the audience here, that this is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, freedom of speech is the most important human right we have, and I totally support the freedom of expression, even if it is against my faith. When he speaks about Geert Wilders has the absolute freedom to say what he wants. It doesn't affect me personally, and neither does it harm my faith. The Western world was the first countries, the Canadian Prime Minister and Americans were the first one to condemn the burning of the Quran by the pastor Terry Jones. I would never have the freedom to stand up and speak the way I do here in my own country of birth. So certainly when we're talking about equal treatment of Muslims in the West, and I'd like to also comment that Professor Ramadan spoke at length about Western values, the Western world. This is not a debate between Muslims and the West, and unfortunately that is what it comes down to. That is being divisible. We're speaking here about human rights that extend to all faiths. So let's get over this victim ideology that we are Muslims and we are being persecuted, and let's talk about the freedom of everyone in the room here today, and let's get to the point of freedom of speech and freedom of religious expression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, would anybody like to comment at this point? You can respond to the questions at this point, if you'd like. We're just going to take some comments on the first three, and then we'll have another three.
Yes.
You're on.
About your two questions about what is going on first in Egypt and the Musalsal, or the series on the Jama'ah. I think it's quite clear that there is a political take on that, and that the government is not far from promoting this. Now, I would say people are not following. I have been following. I haven't watched one of them, and I want to do that. But what I got from people is really there is a political take and trying to demonize the group. I would say that it's politicized, and then I wouldn't go for to sue the people who are doing this, as even from within my family, people are trying to do that. I don't think it's the answer to this. It's a political game, and we should understand in which way this is also being used within the political spectrum. So to distort the image is quite clear, and I'm not sure it's working. In fact, it could have counter effect on people, and this is also what I got from people. About the Islamic Center, I surprised many American Muslims for my position on that. I think that we look at the situation and the history in the States is to struggle for your rights, and it's good. And I think that the American Muslims, the new American Muslims coming from new migration should learn much more from the African-American people in the way they were struggling for their rights. But I also acknowledge the fact that there is a symbolic place there which has to do with something which was hurting the country. I'm not buying in front of people. I know how much it has been instrumentalized by political forces and neocon in the States. And many people say, no, we don't have to give up, we should struggle for our rights. But I look at the comprehensive picture. 20 mosques are now prevented from being built in the States. You can go for this one and say we are not going to give up. And I would propose, and this is what I did in an op-ed in the Washington Post last week, saying you might think about the symbolic dimension of that and listen to the collective psychology and sensitivity of Americans and say on that we may move it from the place or think about an alternative. And we have three options now, is to stop and to think about which kind of proposal, and others are saying an Abrahamic center would be better. And I think it could be good for Muslims taking the lead there in this symbolic place to make it more inclusive and to show we listen to the sensitivity, but we are not going to give up on our rights. Anywhere else, there will be no Muslim-free zones in the States because this is not America. It wouldn't be America by accepting this. So I think it's struggling with intelligence and a reasonable take. This, I think, is the right way. He left, so I cannot respond to what he said, and I am sorry that he left. I think it's not the right way to open this discussion, is not to speak and to leave. But on many of the points that that were made by the Pakistani ambassadors, I have no problem, and I think that we all agree that the cartoon crisis, the minarets and things like this, these are very controversial things, and we disagree with many of the political decisions that were taken against the freedom of Muslims in the West. Now, my point is not on this, I agree with all that, is on the solution. Are we going to solve the problem by saying we need more law and it's just to say to our own societies in the West, no double standard, and go ahead for more consistency. But to add laws to discrepancies is just making things worse. And then victimization of Muslims, yes, that's fine, but I also think now that if you look at what is going on in Western countries, you have now citizens that are fully Muslim, fully Canadian, fully American, fully European, and they are struggling for their rights, and this is the mentality that we have to shape in our countries and not responding in such a way. So I disagree with the solutions, even though I agree with the assessment. And last point, I'm a Western. I'm talking, but what I'm saying is that be careful. People have here uploading what you were saying. And I understand the intellectual take that you are saying, don't speak about the West, is something which has to do with human rights. That's fine in your mind. That's not the reality in the world. It's not. If you go to Asia, if you go to Africa, the people are talking about the West. They look at this discussion as something that can be perceived as a way. So I think that while we should be clear on universal principles that we are promoting, we should understand the viewpoints of the people when it comes to their civilization, not to accept relativism on that. No, to listen to what they are saying and the way to look at the thing. This was the only thing that I was saying. I'm a Western Muslim, but I go to Muslim majority countries and I listen to what they say. And they think that I am no longer Muslim because I'm too much a Westerner. So I'm going to tell them, no, it's not a question. This is not the West, this is universal. They are going to look at it, exactly as I said, arrogant. And I would say that this is where it's a balanced, again, nuanced approach which is taking into account all the dimensions. This is what I wanted to say without undermining the universal values that we are promoting.
No. Let me just add to that the two very short comments. Apart from being president of PEN International, I'm a Canadian. And we have, with every wave of immigration to the country and every arrival and build-up of new religions, of course, there are certain tensions. There might be some tensions around Islam. There might be some tensions about other groups who've come in and they're not religious. But you can look at 300 years of wave after wave, and there's always a bit of tension and it gets worked out. But the fact of the matter is that I look around the country today, I look at the boards of directors I sit on, I look at the banks, I look at the communications companies. There are Muslims everywhere. In fact, they're running several of the largest companies, and I think the largest communications company in the country is run by a Muslim. And what's fascinating is that the real nature of citizenship is that people who come are changed, but equally they change the place they come to. And that is the biggest contribution they make is the way they change the country they come to. And so that being westernized is one thing, but they're changing the West, which is fabulous. And that's a separate issue from understanding people who are outside the West. The second comment I want to make is, with all due respect to His Excellency, the Ambassador, who was given 5 minutes to elaborate on the things that the panel had already agreed about, let me just say that to suggest that PEN is in any way a Western organization suggests that he simply hasn't looked at the membership list. We have 144 member centers in 102 countries. You can add up all the Western countries. You won't get to the majority. You'll get to about a third of the membership. So that's simply an inaccuracy which I regret to point out in what he said. Now, any other questions? I'll go right to the back.
Can I speak? Can I speak? Yes, go ahead. My name is Juan Carrina. I'm a journalist, an independent journalist here at the United Nations. I have a question for Mr. Ramadan, who said that it's not enough to promulgate laws or take new measures. Other strategies need to be found. Well, we're in the United Nations here. The Human Rights Council is on here, and tabled before the Council is a draft to create a new norm in the United Nations, a norm on defamation of religions. This, according to the draft, should become a protocol to be annexed to the Convention Against Racial Discrimination. And such a protocol would require states that ratify the new instrument to adopt laws. And for people, groups of persons in specific countries who are not satisfied with the application of that new law, they could come to a committee of experts here at the United Nations in order to clamor for justice, saying that in their countries they're not getting justice. I'd like to know whether this is your draft, your project. Do you agree that a new instrument with a new norm enshrining defamation of religions is the right path? And how otherwise would you suggest that we tackle this issue? There are 47 countries elected by secret vote by the General Assembly in the Human Rights Council, and then there's Durban 2, which where the concept of defamation of religion was removed from the final declaration. I think that that undermines authority for making progress in this direction. The United States is now in the Human Rights Council bringing new ideas, so it's very difficult for this draft to go forward. So do you think that this is a valid draft? Do you think something different is needed? And how do you intend to work within the United Nations to carry forward the ideas you've expressed today? Thank you very much.
I believe there's somebody, a representative from the United States, who wanted to speak.
Thank you. I just wanted to contribute to the conversation. Obviously, there's been a great deal of debate on these issues in recent days, and I do want to state very clearly that the U.S. shares the concerns of many about discrimination and the targeting and ridiculing of individuals based on their religion and interreligious violence. We condemn all actions that seek to exploit tensions or perpetuate negative stereotyping. You know, the debate surrounding the proposal of one Florida pastor to declare burn the Quran Day have clearly provoked strong feelings and vigorous debate in my country. But this debate isn't new in our pluralistic society, and we've clearly struggled and confronted challenges of intolerance throughout our history. but at all levels of the U.S. government, from President Obama to Secretary Clinton, all the way to the state and local level, leaders have expressed their concerns on this issue, and not just political leaders, religious leaders, community leaders, all have echoed these concerns. So I guess what I would like to also say is what we saw in recent weeks was a confirmation that encouraging open dialogue and open debate is the most effective antidote to intolerance. Government bans on offensive expression, including the burning of a sacred text, would not be legal in the United States and would have been counterproductive in our society. Religious groups from numerous faiths issued statements and reached out to the pastor, urging him to reconsider. Scholars and opinion makers also denounced his inflammatory plans, and as I said, many, many governmental leaders condemned the burning. So, as we have often said in the Council and continue to believe, when held up to the bright light of public scrutiny, one man's very misguided idea was shown for exactly what it was, lacking merit and based on fear and ignorance. And so I would just sort of end with the quote of our president clearly when he affirmed the position of our government that the idea that we would burn the sacred texts of someone else's religion is contrary to what our country stands for, and it's contrary to what our nation was founded on. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to speak with Mr. Tariq Ramadan. Ms. Ramadan, I'm an Iranian woman. I was so surprised you haven't spoken of stoning and all of the misfortunes Iranian women have suffered over 30 years now in the name of Islam. They've been executed, they've been stoned, their eyes have been torn out in the name of Islam. But you do not mention these things at all. I was so surprised you didn't mention them. There's a personal expression is that before cleaning our neighbors' houses, we should first clean our own houses. Islam that you were talking about is a fundamentalist Islam. As a Muslim, I'm speaking as a Muslim woman, you can't consider I'm against Islam because I'm a Muslim woman. But I'm thinking of all the misfortunes of the Iranian people as a result of this fundamentalism, this integrism. Why don't you talk about it? Why don't you talk about the Iranian women who, for the first 30 years, have been forced to wear the veil? Many women don't want to wear it. You speak about France and other countries which have laws which require women not to wear the veil, not to hide their faces. I was so surprised, Mr. Ramadan, that you didn't speak about the other side. Would it not be better to speak of all of the misfortunes today? The problems today are not difficulties between Western countries and Muslim countries. They're problems in our own Muslim countries, and then after these problems spill over into the Western countries. All of these cruel things that happen, I would like to emphasize once again that I'm a Muslim. I'm speaking as a believer in Islam. But the problem is that all of the bad things that happen, people blame these on Islam. Why do you not speak of these things? Why do you never speak out against stoning?
Je vais prendre encore deux autres.
I'll take two further comments or questions. Madam?
Thank you. With all due respect, Mr. President, I should not think there should be a preference between the ambassador, non-ambassador, NGOs, and anyhow. I believe instead of dividing, the West and the East, we're all responsible. We're all responsible. I'm Muslim, I'm Canadian, but I'm more proud of my nationality than my religious. Religious, it's something private. Instead of coming and dividing, the West and the Western society and Western, well, we should bring the good things. In the beginning, why we had to leave our countries and come to the West. We should make our country a better place to live, and then go back to our country, include myself. I had to leave. I had no other choice. But, this is for Professor, which talking about, West and dividing. Like this lady said, he should talk about the Iranian regime who are using under the name of Islam. Execution, torture, raping, the girls before they kill them. All this crime and inhumanity, that's the barbaric part of they use it under the name of Islam. And instead of paying attention to what the Western countries are doing to us, our Muslim people should solve the problem from our, foundation, our countries, our, like helping each other. And it's my last comments for the ambassador. He said he is here the spokesperson for the Islamic government, and it's it's very rude to live like that. I'm going to tell him anyhow. But thank you.
Well, you might just pass on to him that I would have been very happy to have had him stay and listen to the discussion. Yes.
Alfred Desires, Geneva School of Diplomacy. Bottom line is, what, in the opinion of the 4 members of the panel, would be legitimate limitations on the right of freedom of expression? Article 19, paragraph 3 names a number of possibilities: health, morals, national security, etc., reputation of others. The Human Rights Committee, as you may know, is precisely now in the process of adopting a general comment on Article 19. I have the draft general comment here, and the committee, lawyers are for that, for drawing lines, for defining difficult points. And I think that this general comment is outstanding, and I think it delivers many of the answers that we are expecting to receive, partly because of a conference held in this very room in October 2008, where the assembled members decided that the Human Rights Committee should tackle this, especially the relationship of Article 18, freedom of religion, to Article 19, freedom of expression, and especially Article 20, which is the article on incitement to racial hatred. Thank you.
Perhaps we should take comments from the panel now, or we're going to run out of time, because we only have 5 minutes. Who would like to go? Tariq.
Okay. Okay, let me try to be quite precise and focused. Because I don't know what is happening, but sometimes when I speak, it's as if I'm not heard. Yes. So I repeat to the first question that I'm not at all supporting that take. I think that all what you are talking about, defamation of religion, I'm just started by saying I think it's the wrong way. So all the positive measures and what I'm promoting here is completely different from this proposal. So I'm not at all in this, and I'm resisting this take, and I think this is not the right solution. And this is also my reaction to some of the NGOs working in Muslim-majority countries or the organization of the Islamic Conference. I think it's wrong. It's not the right solution. I don't think that we'll get to the point by going through this strategy. What you said from the States, I would say we have to be a bit cautious when it comes to dealing with the people who are nurturing controversies and trying to do this. I think it's not only ignorance. I think we have to be very cautious when, the pastor in Florida is not working out of ignorance. Get Wilders is not working out of ignorance. These are not ignorant people. They know exactly what they are doing. And when I was in Denmark at the beginning of the controversy, I was talking to people. They were telling these journalists, they know exactly what they want to provoke. So to only speak about ignorance is, no, we need a strategy to know that some people are going to use emotional politics to get to the point because they are interested to win the next elections. So this is where we have all together to work as citizens, understanding that we are all in danger of these kind of people using the potential tension within the society if we are not there. So we have to be much more radically involved in countering this people, not by saying, oh, you are ignorant. No, they know exactly what it is all about. Some of them, they know what they want to provoke. So, and of course, some of the followers are just driven by, fear and mistrust and sometimes rejection and racism. And we have to differentiate between people that we respect and political forces that we have to resist. And it's not easy. It's not a political situation which is easy. I'm sorry to tell you, I'm coming here to talk about a very specific topic, and very often, and the people I'm invited to talk about one topic say, yes, but we didn't say that, and we didn't say that, but this was not my topic. And when you say, for example, I'm sorry to tell you, that I never speak about what is going on in Iran, it means that you never read what I was writing, and you never listened to what I said. You go on my website now, my website, www.tariqramadan.com, and read the article about Sakina in Iran. And read also what I have been saying for years about imposing the headscarves for all the women, not only in Iran, by the way. In Saudi Arabia, the same. I think it's a wrong position. I think it's wrong. But the point is that I'm facing, this preventing me from speaking. I cannot enter my country for the last 15 years. I cannot enter my country of origin, Egypt. Saudi Arabia, I cannot go there. So don't come to me to lecture me on things I'm not saying because you don't read them. And to get applause in this room, I think it's very worrying. Because if we are serious about this issue, is to listen to voices and not only to voices that we like. All the voices, the only answer, the alternative measure for this, for me, if we don't want to go to law, is really to open the space of dialogue and to listen to what the people are saying. So you say, I never said that. And even today, I said to your question, you should struggle against the victim mentality within the Muslim communities. We have to do it from within and not to blame the West. So I think that I said it, and I said it clearly, that we have to be self-critical. And once again, in all my books and lectures, I keep on saying to the Muslims, be self-critical, and I want this also to be important. Because for me, our discussion here is part of the answer. So when you say, we don't have to speak about the West, look, I was born and raised in the West, but I travel around the world. And if I think that this divide between the geographical entity and religious is wrong, I still have to deal with feelings, understandings, and psychologies. So to deny this is wrong. So I would say this is why we have to work together. And this is, for me, the way a balanced approach could help us to deal with feelings in Muslim-majority countries. I can tell you something. You heard the ambassador. You were unhappy that he left. I am unhappy that he left. But I can tell you something, that many of the feelings that he was expressing in the Muslim-majority countries are shared. You can deny this, but this is the reality. So what is the solution? To deny it or to try to work to change it? My position is to change it and not to deny it. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the alternative strategies and yes, highlight the fact that I felt some of the questions to Tariq. I don't know where they came from because maybe people in the back could not hear what I was hearing. But I found it a bit concerning that, the world seems to be going through a manipulation process, and never mind. I mean, it's just very strange to me. What will be the legitimate restrictions on freedom of expression, and what can be the alternative mechanisms? The first thing is, of course, that the process through which the ad hoc committee is going through right now, with the possibility of issuing a new norm on defamation of religion, is not a process or an outcome that we will be supporting. And the concept of defamation of religion as a new norm, I think we've all agreed around the table, and everyone and a number of other people have highlighted with too. And I suspect maybe that the Pakistani ambassador felt that indeed there was kind of an agreement that as a concept, it is a fraud, it is vacuous, it cannot be the basis to handle the very complex, difficult situation that we are confronting right now. And I do hope that the ad hoc committee will be, will provide us with greater form of leadership than to embrace a concept that has been shown to be so defectuous on so many fronts. There is one thing they can look at. There are several things they can look at. The first one is the general comment on Article 19. The second is the process that is currently organized by the High Commissioner for Human Rights around Article 20. And that is certainly the basis through which hopefully the Ad Hoc Committee will think that through. Incitement to hatred is by far a better legal framework to address any incitement to religious hatred. But it is not enough, and as I have highlighted earlier, it is distorting the reality to only look at this kind of measures. We need to consider a range of measures. And I just want here again to bring forward to you the example of our colleagues in Kenya who have been at the forefront of looking at incitement to hatred. There have been dozens, hundreds of people who died as a result of incitement to hatred, some of them for religious reasons. And what they concluded was that hate speech regulations are required, but that they are too blunt, and that we need to consider other options, such as aimed at strengthening the participation of all minorities to the public and political life of Kenya, strengthening human rights education and knowledge, for example, on religion, protecting minority and community media, ethical journalism, particularly reporting in a multi-ethnic, multicultural society, intra-ethnic and intra-religious dialogue, meaningful and enforceable code of conduct for MPs and political leaders. These are what is needed right now to tackle what we are confronting, not just the blunt instrument of hate speech regulation that will never address all of the problems. Thank you.
Now, we're going to have to leave the room. Are you right? So, thank you very much for coming. And as you've seen, we brought you a group who come from a range of religious and cultural backgrounds from around the world. And I think you've heard alternative approaches to laws in this area. Thank you very much.